Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for the Baker Tilly Budget 2022 Fireside Chat. I hope you've had your dinner. You grab yourselves a cup of coffee or a glass of sherry and pull up beside the fireplace in warm tropical Malaysia. This will be a casual but informative session covering a macro view of the National Budget 2022, which was announced in Parliament just a couple of hours ago. So we will spare ourselves the nitty-gritty information. The devil will, of course, be in the details of the finance bill that is likely to come about in the next few days, hopefully. And we will focus instead on some key takeaways and reactions to the budget speech in terms of its depth, its reach, in the light of the recovery and rebuilding plans post-pandemic. Now, joining me tonight will be our Group Managing Partner, Mr. Andrew Hing, Managing Partner of Audit and Assurance, Dr. Lok Peng Kwan, and Managing Partner of Baker Tilly Johor, Mr. Huang Zichun. Let us begin by taking a few minutes to look at the key economic statistics that underpin the budget proposals, as we need to appreciate what assumptions and projections the government of Malaysia is actually resting its fiscal strategies upon. Planned expenditure for 2022 is set at 332.1 billion. This is an increase of around 8 billion ringgits from the 2021 budget last year, which was actually announced in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, out of this planned expenditure of 332.1 billion, roughly 75.6 billion, roughly about 22%, is allocated to development expenditure, whilst 233.5 billion is for operating expenditure. Now, there was much speculation on whether this budget will be expansionary enough to push the economy towards recovery. Well, as we can imagine, the development expenditure increase, however, appears fairly marginal when compared to previous years. So it is left to be seen how much of an impact this development expenditure will make in achieving the planned GDP growth, which is projected to be around 5.5% to 6.5%. Planned revenue from tax and non-tax sources is anticipated at 234 billion. This leaves a projected budget deficit of approximately 6% of GDP for 2022. As we are aware, the 12th Malaysia Plan sets a target budget deficit of between 3 and 3.5% by 2025. As you can imagine, there certainly is a steep hill that we need to climb to be able to get there. We note the increased expected contribution from petroleum and commodities and its impact on financing this recovery budget. This is coupled with higher government debt ceiling of up to 65% of GDP that was passed recently by lawmakers. What is troubling, though, is the federal debt level that is expected to reach the 1 trillion ringgit mark by mid-2022, as touted by quite a few economists. Let us now turn to my fellow partners for an assessment of what Budget 2022 appears to them, and whether the budget announcements rang true in terms of meeting expectations by the business community and the man on the street at large. I will begin with Andrew. So Andrew, what are your key takeaways and impressions of the much awaited Budget 2022? Over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Anand. From a quick reading and from what I've been hearing since 4 o'clock this afternoon, it will appear that I think there seems to be a lot of allocation for a lot of things for the general Malaysian rakyat. I think if you look at budget 2022, they have formulated the budget with certain objectives in mind. One of which I think that has been touted recently, even before the budget, was to drive the economy and to protect the recovery of lives and livelihoods of people. I think you can see that from a few things that has been proposed in the budget in terms of the extension of relief for qualifying rental reduction to June 2022. There is also the talk of RBGT at 0% for disposal after 5 years by individual after 1st Jan of 2022. The other objective that they have in mind, including rebuilding resilience of the economy. This can be seen in one of their proposed key tax proposal with the extension of time limit for accumulated losses to be carried forward 10 years instead of 7 for 2019 and after, and up to 2028 for 2018 and prior. The other objective that you can see clearly is also the catalyst for socio-economic reforms. Of course, socio-economic reforms is a wide term, but you see things that they proposed in one of the key tax proposal was an up to 3 years tax exemption for qualifying accredited entities undertaking social causes. I think there will be something that will be of interest for us to see with the finance bill, see what it really means. Of course, there are also a lot of other incentives for SME and so on. But I suppose I'll leave that for discussion with the rest of the panelists. But as a general feel at the moment, it seems to be that the current budget really allocates a lot of incentives for a lot of things. I think hoping to bring about the recovery of lives and the livelihoods of people due to the past 2 years of our COVID-19 situation.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, there were a few issues that they touched upon in terms of allocations that would try and spur the economy in terms of spending, in terms of putting more money in people's pockets, etc. But as has always been the case, I think it's left to be seen as to how these allocations actually trickle down and be put to good use and in the right way at the end of the day. We'll now turn perhaps to look at more from a business community standpoint, particularly the SME sector. And I will turn over to Dr. Locke to talk about maybe some of the relief and recovery measures that you saw in the budget that you welcome, and maybe some that maybe you felt was missed out in the proposals.
Thank you, Anand. I think good evening, everyone. Before the budget announcement today, I would have thought that there shouldn't be much excitement or surprise from today's announcements. Why I say so, mainly because before the budget announcement today, the MOF actually issued a pre-budget statements 2 months ago, I think around about in August, in order to manage the expectations. It is the first time that MOF published the statement this year. So the element of surprise should have been already dealt with before the announcement today. So, but it seems like it is not the case. In particular, I think before the start of the sessions, among us, we talk about the surprise will be in the form of the windfall tax. Or actually, it's not supposed to be referred to as a windfall tax, but it's called a cukai makmur. So which is, in translations, prosperity tax. So the additional of 9% tax is actually very high for the second anything that's above 100 millions. So as compared to your normal rate of 24%, so now if you make more money, then actually you're going to pay 9% on the profit that is actually exceeding 100 millions. So windfall tax doesn't work in this way, in the sense that imagine if a company, they have always been making, let's say 150 millions for last 5 years. So what makes us think that's the additional 50 millions the company has to pay 9% extra tax, although it's for only 1 extra year. The other surprise that I would think that would be the remittance of tax. I would think, which this could be just overreactions of the EU move that named Malaysia in the grey list for tax evasions. So we are trying to be the good boys, meaning after being named. So are we actually scoping too much in a sense? And some of the other items in particular that we have heard today are, if I can name you a few, import duty exemption tax on the EV components. Just a couple of days ago, I was listening to a broadcast. It says that the EU vehicle sales in Malaysia was quite low. It is at below hundreds or something. EU, as in the sense that it's the complete EU, it's not the hybrid models. So with the move of this import duty exemption, right, I think it will actually stimulate the sales and also the activity in the EU vehicles. And petroleum industry, there is also reductions in the Petroleum Income Tax Act. The rate is going to go down to 25%, and there are also some other relief. There is a digital ecosystem incentive. There's low rates ranging from 0 to 10% for some new or existing companies, as well as ITA for digital infrastructure providers. There is also these green investment tax allowances and green investment tax exemptions, which are all now given extra boost. There is this also strategic investment incentive for company investing or relocating the operation into Malaysia. There is a special tax rate of 0% for 15 years, extended for applications until December 2022. Of course, as Anand wanted me to mention, the micro and SME businesses, there is this extension of 20,000 rebates up to the end of next year. Reinvestment allowance has also been extended for the following 2 YA, that's YA 2023 and 2024. But if Anand allow me to also mention this, is I wanted to actually bring out the SVDP that has been mentioned in the speech today, but we couldn't find in the appendix to the speech. So it may come in the form of an announcement from the customs itself. If I remember a few years ago, it was a big talking point when the SVDP on the direct taxes, mainly income tax and other stuff, when it was first announced, it was a big thing. So today, this is the second time we have this SVDP, but this round is on indirect taxes, which I think many companies, including the SME, would have had their experience on how to deal with SVDP, or whether how it works, or in a sense that how it doesn't work. Now, if I can relate this to what Anand mentioned earlier, whether the budget would have dealt with some of the wish list of the SME. There are actually many SME parties participated and given their wish list. We see like on a paper the last couple of weeks. If I can single out the one published by the Small and Medium Enterprises Association, Samantha in short, one of their core is urging the government to stop the mass tax audit operations in order to allow the SME reprieve to turn around in the following 2 years. The president of Samantha, Dr. William, who will be one of the speakers at our budget seminar next month, was quoted saying that the IRB wish to crack down on tax evasion can be done when the economy has sufficiently recovered, meaning to give them a breathing space. So now with this, how do I relate the both? With this SVDP on indirect taxes, right, it may provide the necessary safe harbor, although it is only on indirect taxes, for the SME to clear their burden on some of the back taxes, including the now no longer in existence GST. Just very quickly on how SME can be prepared and embraced if they are to take up SVDP. They should start with, of course, a very quick health check of their compliance status in order to reap the benefit from these so-called tax amnesties. And of course, there are other areas that SME has asked for. I refer to the wish list of Samantha, including the reduction of sales tax to a flat rate of 4%. He wanted a 4%. And of course, this is on the wish list of the not only SME, a lot of corporations every year, which is the call to reduce the income tax rate. And then, as you see, it actually goes to the other extreme. That there's another new bracket on the prosperity tax. So for sure that we know that these are not happening, but they are also more focused on the services from online sales. Also, right before it starts the discussions, Huang also mentioned, there is this sales tax to be imposed on how some of the low value items that sourced overseas by online sellers to send to Malaysia now will be taxed. Which this one in the sense that it is not only expanding the revenue stream, but it is leveling the playing field with the SME, that's with the brick and mortars operations in Malaysia. There are, of course, also a couple of other initiatives to improve the cash flow. If we look at the speech today, there are extension of wage subsidy, grants, loan, and the moratorium. There is also this postponement of income tax installment for 6 months until June 2022. But from the reading of the budget, right, the feel is that the government is in the SME for a longer run, as they are also talking about equity participations in addition to just giving you the loan. I heard today there is this SPV in Khazanah to be set up. So then this may then raise a concern on whether the government's involvements in the business may now be even expanded to most, if not all, sectors of the economy. What most of the SME have asked for during the last 2 years, during the whole pandemic, are aids or assistance for the short or medium term until the SME can be back on their foot. Now, SME businesses, as we all appreciate that, it should always be left for the entrepreneurs to run and not for the government participates in their business. We will talk about all this a bit more later, but in particular, I think if we actually do come back next month again, I wanted to see how Dr. Williams would, in his capacity as president of Samantha, on how he would respond and plan for a post-pandemic world for the business. Maybe now I can pass this back to Anna, which I think he will refer to Huang, then for his reactions on the budget on area other than the corporate, mainly on the impact on the individual. Like today, you also hear a lot of names being mentioned, a lot of names being quoted. So maybe what we want to hear, what would be the impact on Fatima, the individuals on the street. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Lok. I think, yeah, just a couple of points before we move over to Huang. I think the first thing is also the that big, you know, the elephant in the room is actually the prosperity tax that you alluded to earlier. Yeah, I think generally the perception had been, if there was going to be a windfall tax, then it was going to be on a selective basis, targeting particular industries that benefited and went against the trend during COVID-19, etc. What comes to mind is basically the commodity sector, you know, and a few other sectors, the glove manufacturers, etc. But what was shocking today, for me at least, was the fact that this is a broad brush collection of tax within that 1 year. It's supposed to be 1 year time frame, from companies that that basically have got chargeable income in excess of 100 million. Now that potentially is going to impact a huge number of companies as I see it. I think our KLSE 100 and even going down maybe 150, 200 could be potentially paying a significant amount more in terms of tax. The other thing that comes to mind is FDI and the impact. Even though it's 1 year, I think The danger is that perception in terms of there being the ability to just, to actually impose a prosperity tax in that manner is a bit, it'll be interesting to see what the views are from multinationals as well as our local conglomerates who are going to be actually forking out much more next year. So that's something that is quite interesting. And also, of course, we must not forget the general trend on corporate tax has been that of a downward move, with the indirect taxes or consumption taxes playing a larger role in most economies. Our competitors and our peers in the region will be significantly below us if we do proceed with a tax of 33% so that's quite a leap, even though it's just for a year. It's something that is going to need some more thought, I feel. I think the other point that you raised about Samantha, I think it's absolutely correct. There's been a lot of coverage in the media regarding some of the measures that the sector was hoping for. And I think there was also an expectation to some extent that the rate, which is currently 17% on the first 600,000 would be reduced. So when that was also something that the Minister of Finance was silent about, it's not to be seen anywhere. Yes, there were grants, there were allocations, etc., for micro, medium, and small enterprises, but nothing really tangible by way of tax reliefs or tax rates. So that's another point that's worth noting. Okay, can we now perhaps move on to Huang to perhaps give us a feel or flavor of what the man on the street is going to be taking away from the budget proposals. Was there enough goodies to be excited about? What were they? Because I may have missed some of them in all my excitement waiting for the 2022 budget proposals. But over to you, Huang, as to what your takeaways are.
Sure. Thank you, Anand. Good evening, everybody. Well, it was a very long speech with many breaks to drink water that the minister had, with commentary from our speaker to asking the minum. So I think the normal man in the street would not actually have sat through the entire speech. In fact, normally I also won't sit through the entire speech if not for preparing for tonight. So most people will actually wait for a summary or wait for budget seminars like what we are going to conduct very soon. So the feeling I had as a layman, looking and listening to this speech, I would say is one of fear, actually. Now, why fear? Because if you look at what he mentioned a lot of spending, a lot of gifts, a lot of grants, a lot of allocation, and you consider that in the context of what was announced previously, the Penjana, the Pemule, so much money has already been spent. And as highlighted by Anand just now, the country is facing a very high budget deficit. So yes, I would say fear is something that the men in the street, when they listen to all these monies being allocated and being said to be spent, a certain element of fear would definitely be there. Now, of course, being professionals, we understand the logic behind it because we are facing an unprecedented challenge, and the country definitely needs to go with a counter-cyclical fiscal policy to spend when times are tough, so at least we build that capacity going forward. But how many people on the street can truly understand that when they look at it, whether the country has the funds to support that? Now, of course, many people will not really think so deeply as well. To the man in the street, I think they would be thinking of what they can get out of it. And the simplest thing that would appeal to them directly would be the Bantuan Keluarga Malaysia to those who are eligible, the B40s. So there is certain goodies from that, but that will not benefit the majority, but rather those who are really in need of it. Of course, to most of us, there are certain extensions of certain incentives and reliefs that are very useful to us. For example, the lifestyle relief has been extended for another year, which is a special 2,500 ringgit tax relief for purchase of handphones, computers, and tablets. That has already been ongoing for the past 3 years, counting the coming year. So over these 2 years, you can spend as much as up to 7,500 for all these years. So do we really have such a need to purchase so many handphones, computers, or tablets? I think that's something to think about. But it's good that it's there, because it is really a technology age, and it's good to see the country supporting such purchases. Similarly, they've also extended the domestic travel allowance, which is necessary to kickstart and to support the very hard-hit travel industry. And I think, considering that overseas travel with all the quarantine requirements is still very challenging, this domestic travel is definitely something that should be encouraged and will help our local travel agents, hotels and such, to in a way pick up a lot of lost revenue over the time. Now, it was not all positive news, of course. There is imposition of excise duty on chocolate, cocoa, malt, coffee, tea-based premixed products containing sugar, as well as vape products. In a way, if you will, sin taxes. Of course, surprisingly, nothing was imposed on alcohol. Whether that's good or bad, I leave that to you. Of course, excise duty, if you look at it from a positive manner, is trying to encourage healthy living, because none of these are really something that's recommended for people to engage in. So I think where it's coming from is the country is trying to use taxes to encourage certain behaviors or to discourage certain behaviors. So it's good to see that. Now, on that note of encouraging behaviors, one of the things I would like to just touch on is also this income tax exemption for winners of eligible esports competitions. It was very interesting to hear all these names that we never expected to be uttered by the Minister of Finance, all these call signs and tag signs of the Dota players. But if you look at it, is it truly something we want to encourage? Now we are already facing the challenge where our youngsters, our children, are already spending so much time in front of the PC playing all these games. Now they can turn to us and say, I got tax exemption, you don't have. So I think looking at it as parents, we might face that challenge that as these things are going into more mainstream, it will be something interesting for us to deal with. But of course, from a positive note, this is the trend. Esports is being increasingly recognized. So it's good to see that recognition by the government. The other point is the tax relief for cost of medical expenses, consultation, involving registered psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, etc. So this recognition that, especially in this COVID situation, people are facing mental pressures, mental stress, mental illness, and to allow tax relief for that, I think that is very much welcome. But similarly, it also acknowledges the fact that this is a very real problem. And of course, it's something that every organization, as well as individuals, need to be very aware of. In terms of sales tax waiver, for those who are looking to buy cars, that has also been extended until 30th June 2022. Sales tax exemption on passenger vehicles, including MPVs and SUVs. Of course, being an extension is nothing new, nothing exciting, but similarly, you can then now look forward to buying your vehicle. You don't have to buy it by 31st December this year. You have 6 more months to decide. Dato' Lok just now has mentioned on the full exemption on import, excise duty, and sales tax for electric vehicles. And on that, I would like to add that there's also a tax deduction of up to RM 2,500 for EV-related purchases, related to charging and things like that. So it's good to see this encouragement by the government on electronic vehicles. And if you look at the trend now in the world, Tesla has reached a valuation of 1 trillion. Just one of very few, handful of companies to reach that. To take an example of Singapore, since I'm in JB, we must always mention Singapore. Singapore, surprisingly, Tesla is the 6th most popular vehicle in Singapore, even though they don't really have the infrastructure there for it at the moment. So I do look forward at the time that we can actually see Teslas very easily on the road, very well supported in Malaysia. That is the way forward. And you know, I've seen it overseas. It's a beautiful vehicle. So if we can see more EVs, I think that's something good that the country is encouraging. Now, the other point mentioned by Dato' Lok just now on this income tax on overseas income remitted into Malaysia from 1st January 2022 onwards. Being from the border city of JB, I think that is one area that will definitely affect me as well as the people around us in JB very much so. The individuals, especially those who might be commuting or working in Singapore. Previously, whatever they earn in Singapore, whether or not they brought it back to Malaysia had no impact. Where they can bring back everything, also no impact. Now, looking at it, is in a way going back to what we had I can't remember the 80s or the 90s before that was changed. So now they will need to think about what is remitted and what is not. The other thing is because due to COVID, quite a lot of them actually stuck in Malaysia at the moment. They are fully employed by Singapore, working for a Singapore company, but solely because of COVID situation, they are unable to enter Singapore. So under the current rules, they are exempted because this is a temporary situation. But now with this remittance income, so they would also be similarly affected. So one last point before I hand back to Anand, which I'm almost shy to mention this point because there's 4 guys of us here. And I mean, an exemption to that, of course, Dr. Lok did mention something about Samantha, but that is not female. But I think it's still something that should be mentioned, which is that now the government has mandated 1 female member on the board of PLCs. So to the person on the street, I think that is viewed as a very positive news to encourage participation from women, as well as all the other things which was announced to bring back women into the workplace and such. So I think even though that's something I don't want to touch on too much because we're all 4 guys here, but I think it's an important thing to mention and to be lauded for. So with that, I hand back to you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wang. Yeah, a couple of points there. The first one is, I mean, to me, it's probably a really fundamental issue, like you correctly pointed out, which is the tax exemption for income that's remitted back to Malaysia. I mean, yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a bit disturbing as well for quite a few companies and individuals alike. I think when we look at the, when we sing the glories of Malaysia in terms of being an investment destination, and also being a springboard for investments in other countries, then I think this actually potentially goes against the choice of destination, perhaps, of Malaysia for intermediate holding companies and the holding company structures. And that's for the simple reason that investments out of Malaysia to that, into other countries, that is remitted back. Yes, there may be withholding taxes that come into play or tax in that foreign country. But once it hits Malaysian shores, then you are able to distribute that as dividends up to your ultimate shareholders in whichever country they happen to reside in. And that used to be quite an attractive selling point. And I think with this reversion back to the old days, I won't say the bad old days, but the old days, of taxing income being remitted back into Malaysia is going to throw some of this into a little bit of chaos potentially going forward. So I think we need to perhaps think about the implications to our clients as well as the business community as a whole in terms of structuring and how they want to move forward. That was the first point that I wanted to make. Of course, we know the intention for the removal of the exemption, which is, I think it was quoted in the minister's speech that they wanted, I think it was a lot of external pressure that brought about this shift in thinking to put Malaysia on a so-called level playing field with other countries and, blah, blah, blah. But I think at the end of the day, this part of the world in Southeast Asia, Asia generally, it is such a competitive battleground out there in terms of luring FDI and luring investors. And we must try our best to try and remain competitive. But 2 things that we have mentioned tonight already seems to be contrary to some of those efforts, which is the first thing is, of course, the additional tax next year on larger companies and the prosperity tax. And the second is, of course, the issue of the Para 28 Schedule 6 exemption removal. The final point I'd like to make in regards to some of the points you mentioned, I think the cash handouts, quite understandable. I think the B40 needs to be taken care of, and we all empathize with the efforts by the government to try and alleviate some of the hardships and suffering out there. However, I think some thought needs to be also given to the M40. And I remember the run up to this budget, there was a lot of suggestions as to maybe expanding the income tax brackets, which will help a lot of people in the middle income group. The B40 generally, by and large, do not pay, they fall outside of the taxable brackets by and large. But the M40 are smack dab in the middle. Obviously, the T20, different issue altogether. But the expansion of the income tax brackets could have maybe also put a little bit more pocket money into for the taxpayers to be able to then plow this back into the economy by way of extra spending. Okay, so yes, sorry.
Anand, maybe I wanted to echo, not too sure echo or expands on the points that you mentioned earlier, i.e. about comparativeness of the countries in terms of getting the investment and the money to come back. So I think this all came about because there's a lot of territory issues, whether the money was actually derived or the profit being made in a particular country. So that's why in the past there was exemptions for the money to be repatriated back to the home country. So this is to avoid a double tax issue, in the sense that you may actually be running a business over there, but at the same time when you bring it back, you've been taxed again. So, but over the years there were abuses that so the taxpayers that actually end up paying neither of these jurisdictions. So, but again, right, even though we have been listed on a gray list as a risk country for tax evasions or tax planning, whatever words that one may choose, but by actually withdrawing the assumption, right, I would think that it is actually an overreaction to the whole process. So instead of like catching one side of the tax, meaning all organizations that will pay one tax in either of these jurisdictions, we may end up that we'll go back to the olden days. That there is no way for you to actually, of course, then there's where the double tax agreements come into play, that you will be able to actually look at on the individuals country to country basis. But again, right, that's administration wise, right, is actually going to be quite extreme. We are actually going to the other extremes of it. Then, before I pass it back to you, I also wanted to mention Huang was excited about the EV vehicles taxes and things. And I read the articles last year. You're right, Huang, that in Singapore and in UK, we do see a lot of EV vehicles, but in Malaysia, just I think last week I read somewhere that they were only about 60 Tesla. Can't be Tesla. We always correlate EV equals to Tesla. It's like our chocolate drinks, is a Milo kind of things. But EV vehicles, last year they sold 60 units. So now we know that who is going to be the owner for the 61 units by looking at how Huang's excited about the whole process. And if I hand it back to you, Anand, I also wanted to touch a little bit on this SME. The SME, there is also one of the things that they have mentioned before the announcements. They actually asked for the government to set aside 30% of the government procurement for the SME so that they can compete among themselves under an open tender of e-procurement. E-procurements in the sense that it'll be a bit more fair. So you match it against the budget announcement that we heard today, which again, is this introductions of tax compliance certificates as a preconditions for tenderer to participate in the government procurement. So in a sense that the wish, right, was partly met. So if actually it going into that space, right, now it's really up to the SME to qualify themselves with the tax compliance certificates in order to participate in the government procurements. As I can imagine that this is resetting the competitions, and it could be only an opportunity to both participate in the government procurements and also tidying up your tax affairs in a sense.
Absolutely. That's right. I think one thought that just occurred to me was the fact that other than the move to try and, with the SVDP, I think part of the objective, if I'm not mistaken, of the government is to actually try and surface the shadow economy through that process of allowing the SVDP. As we know, when we talk about the shadow economy, it is largely tilted towards indirect tax as opposed to direct tax. I say that because of all the smuggling activities and contraband and everything else that happens in our beloved country. So a lot of it is centered around that, and I hope that the manner in which customs will now announce and implement the SVDP program actually meets that bigger objective. And so that's something to watch out for. Andrew, any thoughts?
No, I just picked up on the esports thing that Juan was saying, and technology. One thing that came that sort of struck me was also the support. I think there was 200 million or 250, I can't remember, allocated for online shopping and e-commerce onboarding. So there is a trend towards that, and I've also noticed that they've also asked for some sales tax to be imposed on the logistic, where items are sourced overseas, logistic providers, and so on. It would seem that the government now is concentrating on this area. I'm just not too sure whether this, on one hand they're providing some onboarding, then on the other hand they are taxing, the delivery, the sourcing, if it is from overseas, whether it becomes counterproductive. So that's one of the queries I have, and one of the thing that sort of interests me, and see how it works, whether it is counterproductive.
Right. Okay. I think that just about sums up our time for tonight. I'm not sure if there's any questions. I don't believe so. So it looks like we'll be able to chill pretty soon. So now a big thank you to our managing partners for taking time out on this Friday evening to be with us, and of course provide their insights as to what they heard this evening. We've not had the benefit of time to digest, to analyze the information in the budget proposals. Of course, this budget proposal is going to be tabled for first reading. We expect the finance bill to then follow suit after the first reading, and it'll be probably out in the next week or so. I will like to now pass over to the time over to Andrew for a few closing words. And if there's no questions and answers, then as far as I'm concerned, thank you very much for being an attentive audience and joining us this evening. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Anand. I don't think there's any questions, so maybe I'll just do a bit of closing. Basically, I think I just want to say that, as many of you would know, today's budget announcement is a proposal. Of course, that is contingent on the finance bill, which will be coming out later. I just want to tell everyone to get a better picture of the actual impact of the budget. Please be sure to register for our upcoming tax and budget seminar, which will take place on the 17th of November. And I understand that apart from the pertinent points that presented by our tax specialists, there is also a very exciting panel discussion that will be moderated by Ms. Freda Liu of BFM, together with Baker Tilly's Malaysia very own Anand Chelia, who will be part of the panel, together also with Dr. William Ng of Samantha Central, who will offer some insights from the SMEs, Michelle Katie Lim, who will also provide her corporate insight as the CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, and Selena Ling, Chief Global Economist of OCBC Bank, who will give her thoughts from a macroeconomic perspective as well. Of course, just from the list of panelists alone, and with Ms. Shredder moderating, you know that it will be a power-packed session. So do remember to sign up after this webinar. And I would just like to say that thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and have a great weekend.